يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Are you going to talk to me again while I'm speaking? صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In the name of God, the compassionate, most merciful. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله رب الشاكرين. الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام. الحمد لله على نعمة الإيمان. الحمد لله على نعمة الهداية. والحمد لله على نعمة الولاية. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وخاتم النبيين أبا القاسم محمد. A nicer, bigger salawat. That's better. وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters, thank you once again for joining us, and thank you for everyone online joining as well. I start by greeting you all with the Islamic greeting of Assalamu alaikum, meaning peace and blessings be upon all of you. So in Texas we find a 4-year-old girl named Mallory. She's in preschool and she's sitting down in her classroom, and a knock comes on her classroom. The teacher goes to the door opens the door. A little fella, another 4 or 5-year-old boy comes in. The teacher says, "You must be the new kid." And he replies, "Yes, I am." She said, "Welcome, this is your new class. Sit over there. That seat is empty. Sit next to Mallory." So this boy sits down next to Mallory. As soon as he sits down next to Mallory, Mallory, with disgust, looks at him and says, "Get away from me, yuck." The teacher says, "Mallory, what is this? What are you doing?" He said, "I don't want him to sit next to me." The teacher was offended and said, "Mallory, come here, come outside." When the teacher took Mallory outside, asked her, "Why did you do that?" Because "I don't want to sit next to a black boy. That's disgusting." So then the teacher was really offended and said, that's not how we run this school. This is not going on. I'm going to call your parents." The teacher calls the parents and says, "Mr. Johnson, this is what happened today at school." Mr. Johnson's like, "I don't know how this could be possible. We don't teach our child something like this." And the teacher said, "Well, I can guarantee you we don't have any racism in this school." And Mr. Johnson said, "Well, we didn't teach him. It must be someone else." The teacher again said, "I guarantee you, and this is not going on, and we can't have this." So Mr. Johnson said, "I know who it might be. It's those bloody Mexican neighbors next door. My kid's been hanging around the daughters there." So I don't know if any of you got that subtle point, but we see that this kid, this small kid, about 4 years old, displayed some racism, Mallory. Where did this racism come from? First, we define racism, what it is. Racism is a belief that all members of each race possess a certain quality or a characteristic that distinguishes them from another. Meaning, basically, they believe that they have certain characteristics, whether it's their looks or other features, that makes them better than others. And in some ideologies, we see that this is also further manifested where there's unequal distribution of rights. Whereas the person who believes he's superior believes that he should get more of whatever there is, whereas the other person should get less, because he's more worthy and he's more entitled. So we go back to the story of Mallory. Where did this racism come from? Psychologists and scientists have studied this for years and years, and they've pretty much come to a similar conclusion. Like the study of Wardell in 1992, we find that Wardell concluded that such a display of racism can be assumed that what this kid has done is just merely mimicked someone else. Mimicked and looked at someone else and copied their action. What the studies, psychological studies, suggest is at that age of between 2 and 5, we are what's called in an egocentric stage of development. Meaning, not that we're egotistical and egocentric and selfish or self-conceited, but at that age, whether you're 2 years old or 5 years old, you're living in a bubble, in your own little bubble. All you care about is yourself. I'm hungry, I want to eat, I'm crying, come to me, mommy. So they don't really have even the capacity to care and concern about the others. So these studies suggest that they must have learned from someone else and they're mimicking it. So we find that also in other studies we see that there are children playing. For example, a Lebanese kid. We have a lot of Lebanese here. We have 10 Lebanese children. They're sitting and playing with each other, given the same scenario, same situation, same context, same variables. They're playing with each other and it's all good. And you find another similar situation where there's 10 children, but one's Lebo, one's Iraqi, one's Aussie, one's Chinese, one's Korean, one's Mexican, 10 different nationalities. And again, you find that it's they're mingling with each other as usual, like the others. So again, the researchers conclude that this is a learned behavior. Racism is something we learn. So we've seen that racism has begun and existed from the beginning of time. We see that in the beginning of time, we see, for example, the settlers, European settlers, when they came to Australia and took over, they saw and deemed Aboriginals as inferior. They were lesser humans. We saw great scientists and philosophers such as David Hume. Some of you may have heard that name, who believed that blacks were inferior. We see other great names like Charles Darwin, where in his theory of evolution, he believes all humans have a similar ancestry of apes. But he says Anglo-Saxons have evolved and developed greater than the blacks. So there has been racism existed far back from the beginning of time, even amongst the elite. There was a general by the name of Harry Johnston, a famous British administrator in the 1890s, and he believed that Negroes in general are born to be slaves. So when we say general, these were the most educated, high-ranking people of the time. So racism began from the beginning of time, and we see it today as well. For example, we see on TV, "Go back to your own country." Go back to the hellhole that you came from. I shouldn't put on the Australian accent because that implies that I'm mimicking and mocking them, but I'm not. I'm just trying to be a good actor. And we see today as well, or recently we saw apartheid in South Africa, or before that we saw Nazi Germany, racism, or we see even today in Afghanistan, my own home country, we see racism where Hazaras, a particular ethnicity, are targeted because they look different and they appear different and because they're different. So let's quickly classify what racism is, and let's see and assess whether you're racist, you and I. Because we hear of these stories and we might think, I'm not racist. But let's see, maybe we are, maybe we're not. Hopefully, inshallah, we're not. So racism can be classified in many ways. One way is classified into 3 categories: behavioral, affective, and cognitive. Cognitive means your mind, what you think and believe, your attitude. Affective is your emotions, how you feel. And behavioral is how you act out. So when we think of racism, usually we think of behavioral racism. When someone says a racist slur, "Are you this? Are you bloody that? Are you Afghan, you Arab, you Iraqi, you Aussie, you skip, you this, you that?" That's one way where we see overtly act out racism. Another way is, for example, we see in more worse examples. For example, in America about 50 years ago, there were buses where blacks weren't allowed, or they were allowed only to be in the back of the bus and the whites in the front. Or there might be bubblers, like we have at schools. There were bubblers for blacks and there were bubblers for whites. Or we see worst case example again where there's genocide, as I said, apartheid, bullies. Yes, my commentator here. So that's behavioral racism when we see it. Not all of us might act out and say, maybe as a joke we might say to each other, "You're a Janubi, you're this, you're that, you're from Basra, you're from Samawa, you're from Karbala, or you're from..." In Afghanistan we make fun of each other as well, the Tajiks, the Pashtuns or whatever. Or the Iranians, they make fun of the Isfahanis for being, for better terminology, tight ass. The stingy. Or they say, in Iraq they call the Kurds, they say Kurds implying that you're a Kurd, meaning you're not that smart or bright, and the Iranians say Turk. So this exists in all cultures. We explored in Australia as well, in America, in Europe, but also in our countries. So behavioral is when we see it being acted out. But some of us don't do it. Maybe at most as a joke, but we don't really do that. So then there's affective racism, where we might not act it out, we might not say anything, but we feel uncomfortable around different races. We do think we're better than them. And this is a bit harder, manifested a bit harder. For example, I'll tell you, where I live, it's called Hornsby. It's about an hour away from here. It's not like Bexley, where there's a lot of Arabs, ethnics. In Hornsby there is, but you find it much less. Mostly Anglo-Saxons, whites. So where I live in Mount Cola specifically, and where I grew up in high school, St. Ives, for example, near the beaches, near Terry Hills, most of my friends, if I tell them I work in Bankstown or Auburn, their mouth will drop and say, "Oh my God, Bankstown, you work in pretty much Compton. You work in thug life areas." They wouldn't even dream of walking there. They don't actively say they're racist, and I'm not calling anyone a racist, but emotionally, they don't feel comfortable. That could be a sign of racism too. Now, all my life, I thought I wasn't too racist, until one day, I remember 10 years ago, I sat in a train, I sat down, and an Aboriginal man came sitting next to me. And I felt uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable and nervous. I didn't know why. And I realized at that point that, I'm uncomfortable because I think that they're inferior to me. Whether it's because of media, whether it's because I've learned certain things, whether, like they say, Arabs are terrorists, or white people, all they do is expand and kill people and take over countries, or Chinese, all they are is this, or all they are is that. Aboriginals, we have I had a notion in my mind, and I realized I'm racist. I wouldn't say anything, act it out, but at least emotionally I was. So that's one level. Now you can assess whether you have that as well. And then there's a cognitive level where you don't. If I sit next to whoever, first of all, thank God that I have Aboriginal friends now and people from all races. I don't have that feeling anymore, but I did. So at the cognitive level of racism, I might sit with everyone, mingle with everyone, that's fine. I don't say racist slurs, I don't say anything, but I do believe that I'm better than them. I do believe I'm entitled to more than them. I do believe that they're a bit lesser than me. So that's at the cognitive level of racism. So what happened next? I will tell you. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we find that racism exists, and it existed at the time of the Prophet as well, in pre-Islamic Arabia. And many of you may know this story, but I'll mention it as well. So at that time, racism was like you might hear in America about 100 years ago, where not only they thought that, in many actually civilizations, they thought that blacks, for example, they were subhuman. Or as I mentioned, some great philosophers or academics, they thought that they were made for slavery. Even back then, blacks at the time were just known to be slaves. At the time of the Prophet, they didn't even meet too many Chinese, but in the event that they did, I can guarantee you that they would have been very racist. So how did Prophet Muhammad revolutionize pre-Islamic Arabia? He noted, obviously this is a problem. He noted that this is immoral, unethical. Racism does not exist in Islam. So we have some quotes, for example, that mankind are all like the teeth of the comb, meaning everyone is similar. We have hadith, for example, that know, O man, that you are all children of Adam, and there is no superiority over an Arab over a non-Arab, and no superiority of a white man over a black man, except in piety, in good action. And so he said these things, powerful things, and I read earlier, I started the the discussion with a verse from the Quran which reads in Surah Hujurat in the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13, that Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind, we have created you into male and female, and into nations and tribes. See, Allah didn't just say into nations, He also said nation and tribes. Because some of us, we're not racist because we're not just racist to other people of other tribes, other nations, but we're racist within our own nation, according to different tribes. As I said, Afghanistan, you have the Tajiks, you have the Pashtuns, you have the Uzbeks. Sometimes each has a battle of their own. Or in Iraq, there's the South people or the North people. Or in Iran, depending on whether you're Arab blood or pure Persian blood or Turkey blood. So God says in the Quran, we have made you into male and female and into nations and tribes. Why? Simple. So that you may know each other. What does that mean? So that you may learn from each other. So that you may interact with each other. So that you may learn and advance the world together. And then the verse ends with, indeed the best of you in the sight of God is the most righteous. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The best of you in the sight of God is the most God conscious. The one with the most taqwa, the one with the most righteousness. So we see we're all in this competition of life together. And just because I'm an Arab, I'm a Sayyid, I'm a white person, I'm a black person, I'm not going to get any brownie points for that. The only brownie points I'm going to get is if I did good, if I made a difference to people's life, if I purified myself. So we saw that the Prophet, at the time in pre-Islamic Arabia, there was no ifs and buts. He noticed this is a severe, disgusting problem, racism, where blacks are treated as slaves. So what did he do? Such a drastic measure. See, we see that in the Quran, we see when there's another social ill, such as alcohol. Alcohol is a big killer, right? Alcohol, in Australia, the biggest number one killer is cardiovascular disease. And other diseases, and a major contributor to that is alcohol. So alcohol is such a social ill, yet the Prophet dealt with it because he knows, okay, it's an ill, but it's mainly between you and your God, okay? So what he did in stages, if we notice psychologically, in stages, he forbade it. First, for example, he said, don't pray while intoxicated. And then, gradually until the prohibition came. But with something like slavery, with something like killing your child if it was a girl, because it affects society, community, the dignity of people, immediately he put a ban on it. Not just that, what did he do? To respond, the black community, he gave them equal status. Not just that, who's heard of the name Bilal? Bilal ibn Rabah. And soon there will be a cartoon that's made in the name of Bilal and dedicated to him. He was a black slave from Abyssinia, and what did the Prophet do? He gave him such a high position. Imagine that you're a president of the country, and you're a president of, for example, 100 years ago in America, and you make a black person come in the parliament. How big a deal that would be. That's 100 years ago. Imagine 2,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. The racism was much more extreme than 100 years ago, and the status quo was very different as well. So what did the Prophet do? He brought Bilal from a slave to the lofty position of mu'adhin. The call to prayer was given to him, his role, his responsibility, and he was to call the adhan. And it wasn't just a role that was, he's in an office doing his own business. It's a role where people would visibly see that there's a black man chanting and calling us to prayer. Prayer being the rukn, the one of the most fundamental aspects of religion. So that's a lofty station that the Prophet gave. Because as I said, when it comes to certain things, the Prophet didn't play around. He made immediate changes, and that's why we love our Prophet. And that's why we believe that He did so much for us. And so just basically, and to pretty much wrap it up, we talked about racism, that it's learned. Okay? And so we can also learn not to be racist, if you want to just take that point. We learned that there are different aspects of racism. We can be racist outwardly. If you are, you deserve a slap, first of all. You know? If you're doing it just to muck around, as I said, as long as the other person knows it's a joke, he laughs with you, okay, cool. But if it's hurting someone, really, you deserve a slap, or probably more. Maybe that in itself is a social ill, displaying violence, but it's not good, it's not cool. So we might be outwardly racist behaviorally, or affectively, emotionally, or cognitively. So you assess where you are, and knowing that it's a learned behavior, we can learn not to be as well. And finally, we see in Islam the changes that the Prophet brought to emphasize that all mankind are equal. As I said in the Quran in chapter 49, it said that we're all equal, even male, even female, even Arab, even black, even Mexican, even whatever vatos locos you are, or Australians, Dinky Dye, Aussie. You're all in the same level. You're all in the game of life together, competing to be the best possible, to serve others the most, and to have taqwa. And so just quickly, finally, we'll talk about how to combat racism if we have racism in us. One of the ways we can combat racism, as I said, first you identify which level of racist you are. If you're not, excellent. One way, an excellent way, is interracial marriage. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One way is interracial marriage. This, again, forces us to bring someone from another culture into our house. And through those interactions, we know that, we are the same. Not to boast, but alhamdulillah, in our family, I married an Arab from Iraq. My sister married an African with Indian origins. Some of you may know, very famous scholar, Sheikh Abbas Virji. My other sister married a dinky dye white Australian called Matthew. And I don't know, my brother might marry a Chinese woman, I'm not sure. But see, one way to combat racism is interracial marriages. Did you all know that our imams generally, what race are they? Arabs, yeah? Did you know that our final Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi al-Muntazar, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, his mother, anyone know where she's from? Rome. She's Italiano. She's Italian. What if I told you that the parents of some of our Imams were dark and black? I'll leave that thought with you. So as you see, interracial marriages were even at the time of our Imams. There's not a big deal. If anything, it brings people together. As the Quran said, we learn from each other. Another way is we just study about racism scientifically, if you want to see whether people are indeed different, if they have different abilities. And you see that at the end of the day, everyone, no matter where your background is, you have the same skin and bones, you're the same skeleton. Whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're male, whether you're female, your origin is the same. And the end is the same as well. We go back to Allah. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. And the most easiest example of combating racism is just interact with people with other races. I invite my friends who live in the North Shore, come, I'll take you to Auburn and Bankstown, and you'll see that it's similar to where you live. It's just there's more ethnics and there's more nicer food possibly, and maybe it's a bit louder. And so, in conclusion, we realize that racism is actually a very wrong and immoral and unethical thing that we should all try and remove from our hearts. Because racism implies superiority. If I'm racist, if I believe someone from another part of my country, I'm better than them, it means that you have a bit of pride and ego about where you come from. Pride in its general sense, there's no problem with it. I'm Afghan, I'm proud of it. You're Lebanese, you should be proud of it. You know, I believe there's even a saying, Hubbul Watan Iman, and it's attributed to Imam Ali, that the love of your nation is faith. But when you think you're superior, you imply that you are proud, you have ego, you're better than them. And we have hadith that people who have even an iota, a small mithqal of ego and pride and arrogance will not even enter heaven. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. الثالث على حب حسين عليه السلام. And so we find that in the saga and story of Imam Hussein, we find that a lot of the things that the Prophet established and abolished, established unity, and he abolished racism, and he abolished this pride from which clan you're from, and he abolished nepotism, and these still existed. And that's why we find that Imam Hussein alayhi salam said, إنما خرجت لطلب الإصلاح في أمة جد رسول الله. I did not revolt to cause evil, nor did I revolt for my own personal selfish gain, and nor did I revolt in an unjust cause. Indeed, I rose to seek reform and to bring change to the nation of my grandfather Muhammad, as he identified that there's so many changes, so much ill and evil has taken place, that within a span of 50 or so years, the people, the ummah, the so-called ummah of Prophet, completely forgot that Imam Hussein is the blood and the flesh of Rasulullah. Rasulullah said, Husaynun minni wa ana min Husayn. Hussein is from me and I am from Hussein. And within a span of just 50 or so years, these people forgot. And it wasn't because they didn't see these people. Imam Hussein was living with them. Imam Ali was living with them. And so that's why the Imam Hussein said, I have indeed risen to bring change. And so tonight we remember a person called Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. As-salamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. If I can request the lights off, please. Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi was from a tribe called Riyah. They were the ashraf of Kufa, noblemen of Kufa. And Hur was known to be a brave and gallant warrior. He was a courageous warrior. And he was one of the high-ranking commanders of the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, who faced the opposition of Imam Hussein, who came to stop Imam Hussein, who came to seek his allegiance, seek the allegiance of Imam Hussein for Yazid, that tyrannical ruler. And it was Hur, this companion, who was in the side of evil, who was in the enemy's side, that came and met Imam Hussein and stopped him on his way to Kufa and diverted him towards the land called Karbala. And it was this Hur that prevented Imam Hussein from even drinking water, because they had clear orders from Ibn Ziyad to take his orders, to take his allegiance or kill him. And so Hur was initially working with Ibn Ziyad, and he came with his 1,000 or so companions to halt the progress of Imam Hussein, and they met. And when Hur stopped Imam Hussein from drinking water and stopped him from doing certain things and diverting him, Imam Hussein tells him, "May your mother weep for you, O Hur." And Hur didn't reply. Hur said, "If it was anyone else, Ya Hussein, if it was anyone else, I would have replied." Because don't forget, Hur was a tough guy. No one just talks to him like that. But he said, "I know who your mother Fatima Zahra is." A discussion takes place, and when the time of prayer comes, Hur knew who Imam was, but he was a government agent. He worked for the wrong side. And so he even joined Imam Hussein in prayers and allowed Imam Hussein to lead. A scholar by the name of Dr. Shariati, he says, this story is about a choice, the most important manifestation of the meaning of human being. But what kind of choice? We are all faced with several choices in our everyday life: career, friend, wife, house, education. But in this story, the choice is much more difficult. It's the choice between good and evil. It's the choice between the truthful and the deceiving religion, between the just and unjust politics, with life being the price to pay if you choose the other. See, often we have a choice, and if we make the wrong choice, it's not a big deal. But if he made the wrong choice in this instance, he would have died, he would have been killed. So Hur realizes that if he stays with the army of Yazid, his world is guaranteed. He'll get the riches, he'll get the status in this world that he wants. But if he joins the army of Hussein, his death is imminent, he will die. So it's the morning of the day of Ashura, and though the battle has not yet started in the fields, Hur realizes that the opportunity would not last. Time goes fast and the moments count. The storm has already started within him. From the beginning, Hur was hoping that the events would not lead to war, but now war seems to be unavoidable. Hur now realizes that adding his position with his religion is impossible. And so at last resort, he talks with the commander Umar ibn Sa'd, who like himself doesn't really want to engage in war. But because he accepted also the governorship of Ray and Gurgan, he was weak in his faith. Hur and Umar ibn Sa'd both have come a long way from the palace of Yazid to Karbala, and together they share the same status and social class. So Hur asks Umar ibn Sa'd, can we avoid this situation and find a peaceful resolution? You know, Umar said that if it had been up to me, I would have done as what you propose. But your master Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad has not accepted a peaceful resolution. Hur said, so you're going to fight this man? Yes, he said, by God I will fight, and in the least there will be separated heads and broken arms. So it's clear now, Hur, that there is no more games to play. He has to choose. For Hur now, Yazid's army of thousands is nothing more than just a bunch of faces without meaning. A crowd of men without souls. A group of people without hearts. Those who shout but don't know why. Fight but don't know for who. In his travel from shaitan to God, Hur did not study philosophy or theology. He was not a master of sciences, of fiqh or anything. But he just changed his direction. Why? Because he knew, Imam Hussein, that this was not right. I know that he's the grandson of the Prophet. And he had seen and felt the kindness and the greatness of the man that Yazid wanted to kill. And he had seen how helpless these people were. This small band of 100 or so being bullied. And Hur's dignity and pride didn't allow him to just leave a people oppressed. Just like we shouldn't leave people when we see people being bullied and people being racist. We shouldn't allow our dignity to allow that. Our dignity should not allow that. But this was far greater. Hur knew that if he defended these people, he'll die. So having started his journey and riding his horse, he slowly leaves his army towards Hussein. Muhajir ibn Aus, who sees him agitated and worried, he sees Hur being a bit worried and frustrated. What's wrong with you, Hur? I'm puzzled by you. By God, if I were asked who is the bravest of men and companions, I would have said it's Hur. But now you seem like you're worried and disturbed and anxious. Hur said, I find myself between hell and heaven. And I have to select between them, and by God, I will not choose anything but heaven, even if I were to be cut to pieces and burned to ashes. So by this stage, Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi has realized the wrong that he has done. He led Imam Hussein to this trap. Hur slowly approaches the camp of Imam Hussein. And as he gets closer to the camp of Imam Hussein, he's anxious and worried from the shame and embarrassment of facing this great man that he was about to stop, this great man that he did stop and he was going to allow to be killed. He puts his armor down and takes his boots off, and he says to Imam Hussein, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Peace be on you, O Hussein. I am the one who closed your path to Hussein. I am the one who closed your path, O Hussein. Can I ask for forgiveness? Is there a way out for me? Imam Hussein said, of course, I accept your apology. And as the beautiful man that he was, he hugged Hur and understood the predicament that he was in. And Hur requests to be the first to defend the Imam because he led him in this trap. Imam says, go. And he couldn't wait any longer, and he returns to the front and attacks the army of Umar with the most severe and bitter words, letting his army, an ex-commander, know that he is no longer a slave. He is Hur. He is free. Umar ibn Sa'd, his commander, responds by throwing an arrow. And he's the first to throw the arrow, and he officially begins the war. And he says, be witness and let Amir al-Mu'mineen Yazid know that I was the first one to throw this arrow. And I'm the first one to throw this arrow at the army of Hussein. And so the battle of Karbala began. And Hur ibn Yazid fought a very gallant battle. But in the end, he died. For they were a mere 72 or so warriors facing 30,000 plus. And when the Imam of Freedom attends his bloody body, just before his death, he tells him, Ya Hur, God bless you, Ya Hur. You are indeed both free, you're free in this world. And your mother named you correctly, he named you Hur. Imam Hussein said, Ya Hur, your mother named you correctly by naming you free. ولعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين، إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
صلوات على محمد وآله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا أمير المؤمنين وأولاده المعصومين بالحق حجج الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلوات.